Hi, friend. So good to be with you today. This is the 16th of November. We're on Luke chapter 16. As I told you, we're going through the 24 chapters right up until we get to Christmas. And I think it's just going to be a wonderful thing to make Jesus the focus of this season. Luke chapter 16 is very, very important, and most of the time is completely misunderstood. You got to understand how closely tied together chapter 15 and chapter 16 is. So I'm going to ask you just to open your heart. Give me just a couple of seconds. I'm going to tell you some things, maybe that you've never heard before. Something that will maybe instruct you and help you have an understanding of these chapters. But chapter 15, we talked about this yesterday, the importance of the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son, because the Pharisees were absolutely giving Jesus the business over the fact that he was having dinner with sinners and tax collectors and all the religious people. The Pharisees, the scribes, those that keep the law, they did not appreciate that. They were very much known for separating themselves from anybody else. They had the key to knowledge, but they never were willing to give that to anybody. They stood in the doorway and never let anybody pass through. And Jesus called them all kinds of things. He referred to them just recently there of hypocrite. You are nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. And so he went on and he was talking about that, but he didn't stop talking about the lost son, lost sheep, and the lost coin. Now he goes in chapter 16 and he talks, from chapter 15 said he talks about our responsibility to them, but chapter 16, he goes even deeper. He began to talk about using our resources, our stewardship in the lives of the lost, of those who can't help themselves. So let me get into this right now. This is chapter 16. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possession. He was a steward. That's how the King James Version responded to him, called him a steward. So what he's going to do is now he's going to talk about our stewardship over our resources to reach out to the lost son, the lost sheep, and the lost coin. How God gives us all of these resources. And of course, our stewardship consists of our time, our talent, and our energy. And he's saying, I want you to use those things like leverage, your money, the things that come to you to reach out. That's one of the main purposes that God gives you and equips you like he does, is because of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And so that's what he's talking about there. This particular, he's got this story of a rich man that had a steward. He had a manager that was apparently over a lot of his goods. I mean, to the point that he could pretty much buy what he wanted, sell what he wanted. When someone is in upper management like that, they can just make decisions and say, well, I think this is what we need. We're going to invest in that. We're going to buy that land. We're going to get rid of this customer. We're going to find another one. Well, that was the position. He was in a position of great power. And but apparently he had been abusing it. Apparently he had been spending money that wasn't his. He was just, maybe it wasn't his. He was mismanaging it. And so the manager, or rather his lord, his boss, called him and said, what's this I hear about you? I want you to give account for your stewardship, for your management, because you can't be manager anymore. In other words, I want you to bring all the payables, all the receivables. I want you to bring everything together, and you're not going to work for me anymore. And so this manager, he panicked, and he just said to himself, what am I going to do now? My master's taking away my job. He said, I'm not strong enough to dig. All I've ever done was sit here and push the pencil. And to beg, I'm ashamed. Well, of course, you've been standing next to the king this entire time, and now suddenly you're out there begging on the street corner. And he thought, I don't know what to do, that when I lose my job, that the people will receive me into their houses. Now, here's what he did. It said he called each one of his master's debtors. Now, he only gives reference here to two, but he didn't stop there. That was just the example of what he did. He went to every debtor that owed money to his master. And he asked the first, he said, how much do you owe my master? And they said, well, I owe 900 gallons of olive oil. So the manager said, I'll tell you what, I like you. You are my friend. So I want you just to sit down quickly and Make it 450. I'm going to just, because I like you, I'm going to cut your debt in half. What is that person going to do? They're going to think, you're the greatest guy that ever lived on this planet. And then he went to another one and said, how much do you owe? And the guy said, well, I owe 1,000 bushels of wheat. And so he replied, well, I'll tell you what I want you to do. Because you're my friend and because I love you and I appreciate your friendship, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut your bill down. I want you to take your bill and make it 800. So he used his resources, his leverage, his stewardship to get their debts forgiven, okay? And to keep them in straight standing with their Lord. He used his power, his leverage, whatever it is, his stewardship to help people get their debts forgiven. Well, the master, verse 8 said, the master commended the dishonest and the unjust steward because he had done shrewdly, it said. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their kind than are the children of light. And I tell you that the world's wealth to use verse 9, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The King James says it more like this. It says that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. That's really talking about when you die. He's talking to you to use the resources that God brings into your hands to reach out to the lost king, or rather lost coin, lost sheep, and lost son, that when you die, when your stewardship is over, they're going to receive you with open arms. You're the one that paid for them basically to get there. You used your time, your talent, and your energy for the lost. That's what's important to God. Don't you remember John 3:16? For God so loved the world. He loves the world. And he wants you to use your resources to help reach the world, the lost. And so that's what he was talking to them about, because all of these Pharisees, they were just poo-pooing everybody else that was around them. I mean, if you didn't belong to their little club, you didn't know the secret handshake, you didn't know the right words to say, they just basically ostracized you. And that's what they did to all of these other people. And so this again goes back to chapter 15, where it said that Jesus ate with tax collectors and with sinners. And the Pharisees just blew up. So Jesus basically was talking about this. And he said, and this is so important, he said, verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with very much. Now listen, guys, he's talking about your money here. He's talking about your resources. If you can't be trusted with the little things that God's given you, how are you going to expect him to trust you to give you big things? He's just not. Whether you know it or not, God's looking at your stewardship. God's measuring your actions. You're going to give account for everything that is done in this life, in this body. And you're going to have to understand that if you can't be faithful with the little things that God's given you, he's not going to entrust into you what he calls true riches. So that's what he said. He said, whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. But whoever is dishonest with very little is dishonest with much. I'd always told people, if man will lie to you, he'll steal from you too. Well, that's true. So verse 11 said, and if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? See, he's talking about something bigger there. And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who's going to give you property of your own? See, you have to understand something, that things that happen to you later are the result of what you do now. When you're faithful over something now, God is going to cause it to flourish later. That's just how that works. That's what Jesus was saying there in verse 12. And then he said, come on, because he was talking to a lot of these people, they were very greedy. I mean, he was talking to these Pharisees, that money was their God, really. And he told them, he said, nobody can serve two masters. Either you're going to hate the one, love the other, or you're going to be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all of this, and they were sneering at Jesus. They ridiculed him. They criticized him. They mocked him because he said that. It said they were covetous. They were greedy. See, and that's who Jesus was talking about. And he's saying, you guys, you're not going to be able to serve God. You're talking about being these great religious leaders, but you're not going to be able to embrace money and embrace God at the same time. You're going to have to embrace God and follow what's in his heart, using your resources for the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. And so it said there that the Pharisees, they were covetous. They loved money. And he said to them, he said, you're the ones that justify yourself in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in the sight of God. Now that's very important. And then he goes on and he says something that you listen to it and you think, why did you put those statements in this? I mean, what you're about to say feels like it doesn't have any context with everything else. Here's what he said, verse 16, 17, 18. He, right in the middle of rebuking these guys over their money and their greed, being covetous, he said this, the law and the prophets were proclaimed until John, and since that time the good news of the kingdom is preached, and everyone is forcing their way into it. It's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for the least stroke of the pen to drop out of the law. And then he says this, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And you read that and you won't think, what? I mean, why is that there? Why did you put that in there? Well, here's the reason why. The reason why those 3 verses are in there, because it's a very odd thing, is because he was telling them that trusted in the law. They claimed to be the keepers of the law. He said the law demands something from you and has consequences. See, these Pharisees, they loved the law, but they hated the lost. And the covetous and the self-serving, according to the law, well, they're going to come to the same fate as this if they don't consider the lost coin, lost sheep, and the lost son. So when he was basically talking about this adultery situation, he was just simply saying that's in the law and not one jot or tittle is going to fall. But you got to understand something that the law has consequences. It's demanding something, but it's going to demand something of you because you're covetous. You're self-serving, you're self-seeking. And then he said this, he gave this parable of the rich man and Lazarus. He said there was a rich man, which obviously was a Pharisee. He was dressed in purple and fine linen, and he lived in luxury every day. Now listen what he said. And at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Just as a little side note here, I believe this with all my heart. I believe when Christians die, I believe that angels show up and carry them to the Father. I believe they are carried by angels into that place. But it says angels carried him to Abraham's side. And the rich man, what happened to him? He died also, and he was buried. And in hell, where he was in torment, he looked up and he saw Abraham far off and Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water to cool my tongue because I'm in agony over this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember in your lifetime you received your good things while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted here, and you're in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, and those neither can they cross over from where you are to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family. For I have 5 brothers, to have him warned them that they not come to this place of torment. And Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. They have the law just like you have the law. Let them listen to them. They have the law and the prophets. And they said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they'll repent. And he said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced, even though someone rises from the dead. Now, that's, again, you got to understand the reason for that. I just went ahead and read through the whole thing. The reason is the covetous and the self-serving, according to the law, they're going to come to that same fate if they don't consider the lost coin, lost sheep, and the lost son. That's what God wanted. And these people, literally, these Pharisees who were rich, they were so rich in the treasure that the lost needed, but they let them die of starvation and lack. They had everything that that poor beggar needed, but he sat there and watched them die. And that's what he was saying that the Pharisees were doing to those. Go back to chapter 15 when he sat down and ate with tax collectors and with sinners. And the Pharisees, he was saying this rich man here, that's the Pharisees, and the beggar, that's Lazarus. Don't think that you're going to escape the penalty of it, because not one jot nor tittle is going to fall from the law. So you got to understand what Jesus was really, and this entire thing was talking about reaching what God loved, using your resources to do it. And then he turned his it was his wrath against the Pharisees for what they had done and for what they said. See, this is something, whether you know it or not, people who become self-serving and self-righteous, that's not attractive to God at all. There's nothing about that is appealing to the Lord. You're going to have to realize, if you want the heart of God, you're going to have to find out what he loves. And what he loves the lost. I mean that. And he's telling you, I want you to use your resources. Now, sometimes that's money. Many times it is, because that's leverage you can take and pay for the gospel to be sent. In other words, sometimes I can't go, but I can send someone. Or you can use your time, your talent, your energy. That's what consists of your stewardship. Okay? So this back here at the beginning of chapter 16, this unjust steward, he used the leverage of his time, talent, and energy to impact people around him. And that's what God's saying he wants you to do. He wants you to impact the people around you and help get their debts removed. Help get their debts forgiven. That's so important. I am just telling you that is so important. And I want you, everyone, to really take to heart that these are the things that matter the most to God. God doesn't care how big your church is. He really doesn't care as much as you think how comfortable you are. We base the will of God on how comfortable we were. Isn't that kind of sad? How do you feel? I don't feel too great. Well, you must not be in the will of God. No, that's God's not. As a matter of fact, God might send you into uncomfortable places. So let me show you how it works. Darkness cries out to God for help. What does God do? He sends light. So light is sent on a mission to the place where darkness is. But we don't want to do that many times because they're beneath us. They smoke, they drink, they have sexual problems, they have all of these other things that are detestable to us. We would never look at that. We would never go to that place. We would never be around them. Oh, let me hold my nose. I could never be around something like that. And see, that's where we miss the heart of God. And many times we miss what God really has for our lives personally. You know, sometimes we are sent into uncomfortable places. Like I said, light is sent into darkness. Sometimes we're sent into uncomfortable places where people are angry and people are crazy and people have bad habits. You know, and too often we won't tolerate that. God can't trust many people because they'll punch darkness in the nose if you're not careful. You know, well, it's true. Sometimes I don't like the way they talk to me. Well, that's why Jesus talks so much about, he says, if somebody offends you, he said, forgive them. He said, if they smite you on the cheek, turn the other also. If they compel you to go a mile, go with them twain. Forgive them. You know, and this is so important for you to understand. That's the heart of God. So there's people all around you who's crying for help. The Lazaruses are all around you. They're starving to death just outside your gates. What are you doing in behalf of them? Do you at least invite them to church? Let me take you into the place of prayer. Let me take you. We'll pray for you. We'll minister to you. We'll feed you. Can you at least do that? I see people, they do. I don't know that anyone around them even knows they're believers. I mean, we need to come to the place that we start reaching outside with our time, our talent, and our energy to touch the lost, lest we be like that rich man with Lazarus. My goodness. God's got more things for us, and your stewardship is too important to waste on trivial little religious things. Come on, get out there and get your feet wet. Get your hands dirty. Get out there where people are. Hug those that are unworthy. Just put your arm around and embrace those who the other religious folks won't have anything to do with. Let them know that you love them and you don't want anything from them except to love them. That's all. That's really what they need. Okay? All right. Well, that's the, excuse me, the 16th chapter of the book of Luke. There's obviously, I literally am blowing over that so fast that I'm sure I've just missed so many things. But take some time and meditation and looking over it. We'll be on chapter 17 tomorrow. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. I sure love you guys. I mean that. Love you, and I'll be praying for you and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. You have a wonderful evening. God bless.